Before the battle, Sitting Bull didn't lead a single charge. He wasn't even at the front. He had already seen how it would end, in a vision days earlier, of soldiers falling into a Lakota camp like grasshoppers dropping from the sky. Then he watched it happen exactly that way. By the end of this video, you'll understand what actually happened at Little Bighorn in June of 1876, not as a story of American defeat, but as a story of Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho people defending their families, and what it cost them to win. It's 1876 in the valley of the Little Bighorn River, what's now called Montana. Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer leads the U.S. 7th Cavalry against one of the largest gatherings of Plains nations in a generation. The Lakota Sioux, Northern Cheyenne, and Arapaho camp together for safety and ceremony. The U.S. government wants them confined to reservations, but they refuse. What follows is the most famous military victory Native Americans ever won against the United States, and one of the most misunderstood. To understand why thousands of Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho were camped together that June, you have to go back further than most people realize, to 1868, and a treaty signed at Fort Laramie. That agreement created the Great Sioux Reservation, a huge stretch of land covering much of what's now South Dakota, and it recognized the Black Hills, Pahasapa, as Lakota territory forever. The Lakota didn't just live near the Black Hills. In their worldview, it was the center of everything, the place where the world began, where vision quests were done, where the dead returned. The treaty also promised the Lakota the right to hunt on unceded land further west, including the Powder River country, as long as the buffalo ran there in numbers worth hunting. For a few years, that peace mostly held. Then, in 1874, Custer led a military expedition into the Black Hills, technically to scout for a fort, but he brought along geologists. They found gold. Word spread through newspapers within weeks, and by 1875, thousands of prospectors were pouring into land the US government had promised, on paper, would never be settled by outsiders. The government's first move wasn't to remove the miners, it was to try to buy the land instead. Officials sent a commission to negotiate a sale in the fall of 1875. Lakota leaders, including Sitting Bull, refused outright. Some accounts describe him picking up a pinch of dirt and saying he wouldn't sell even that much. Other leaders were willing to discuss terms, but the numbers offered were seen as insulting, a fraction of what the land was actually worth, and no agreement was reached. When the sale failed, Washington didn't back down or reconsider. Instead, it simply redrew the rules of the relationship entirely. In December of 1875, an order went out. Any Lakota, Cheyenne, or Arapaho not living on the reservation by January 31st, 1876, would be considered hostile, and the army would be authorized to force them in. Now, here is the reversal most people don't expect. The so-called hostiles weren't raiders, and they weren't defying the original treaty. They were families living exactly as the 1868 agreement allowed them to, following buffalo herds across unceded hunting grounds in Montana and Wyoming, moving with the seasons the way Plains life had worked for generations. Winter travel across hundreds of miles with children, elders, and entire herds of horses was close to impossible in the time given. Many bands never even received the message. The United States was preparing to go to war against people for failing to obey an order most of them didn't know existed. By spring, several of these bands began converging near the Little Bighorn River. Some of that was strategic, safety in numbers, as the military threat grew clearer through the winter. But some of it was ceremonial. Early summer was the traditional time for the Sundance, one of the most important religious rites on the Plains, and different bands would often gather for it regardless of politics. By mid-June, the combined village had grown to an extraordinary size, likely 7,000 to 10,000 people, with somewhere between 1,500 and 2,000 warriors among them, representing all 7 Lakota bands along with allied Northern Cheyenne and Arapaho camps, each with its own leadership, arranged along the river in a crescent that stretched for miles. Sitting Bull, a Hunkpapa Lakota holy man, wasn't a battlefield commander the way Custer was. His authority came from spiritual standing, earned over decades, not military rank. During the Sundance that June, according to Lakota oral tradition, he danced for 2 days without food or water, staring at the sun, and offered pieces of his own flesh in prayer, 100 small cuts along each arm, a genuine sacrifice, not a symbolic one. It was during this ceremony that he reportedly received the vision that would define what came next. Soldiers falling upside down into the camp, like grasshoppers dropping from the sky, their hats falling off as they fell. To the people gathered there, this wasn't interpreted as metaphor. It was received as a promise of a coming attack and of its outcome, and word of it moved through the camp within days. Meanwhile, it was largely unknown to the people in that village that the US Army had launched a coordinated three-pronged campaign that spring, sending separate columns converging from different directions to trap the Lakota and their allies between them. General Alfred Terry commanded one column, General George Crook another, and Colonel John Gibbon a third. Custer's 7th Cavalry, roughly 600 men, was part of Terry's force, sent ahead as a fast-moving strike unit to locate the village and hold it in place until the other columns arrived. That plan started falling apart 8 days before Little Bighorn, when General Crook's column ran into a large force of Lakota and Cheyenne warriors at the Battle of the Rosebud and was fought to a standstill and forced to retreat. Crook's column, meant to be part of the pincer closing in on the village, was now out of the fight entirely, and neither Custer nor Terry had any way of knowing that yet. On June 25th, Custer's scouts, including experienced Crow scouts who knew the terrain and had climbed a high point known as the Crow's Nest that morning, warned him the village ahead was larger than anything the 7th Cavalry had ever engaged. So large, according to some accounts, that one scout warned there were more warriors in it than the regiment had bullets. Custer doubted the scale of the warning. He was also convinced the village would scatter into the hills the moment it spotted his men, and he didn't want to lose the fight before it started. Rather than wait for Terry's slower-moving infantry and artillery to close the gap, he decided to attack that same day and split his already outnumbered force into 3 separate battalions to strike from multiple directions at once, one under Major Marcus Reno, one under Captain Frederick Benteen, and one, which was the largest, kept under his own direct command. That single decision of dividing an outnumbered force with no reinforcements within reach is the hook at the center of this entire battle. Custer didn't lose simply because native warriors outnumbered his men, though they did by a wide margin. He lost because he isolated 210 of his own soldiers under his personal command from any possible support, and sent them against a village holding far more fighters and far better organized ones than any Army intelligence had predicted. Reno's battalion struck first, hitting the southern end of the village, but was quickly overwhelmed and pushed back across the river in a chaotic retreat that cost him nearly a third of his men. Benteen's battalion, arriving later, joined Reno survivors on a defensive hilltop and dug in, unable to reach Custer at all. What happened to Custer's own detachment next unfolded fast. Historians estimate under an hour for the entire final engagement, and no soldier in it survived to describe it afterward, which is part of why so much of what happened there is still pieced together from Lakota and Cheyenne accounts, archaeological work on the battlefield done more than a century later, and educated reconstruction. Lakota and Cheyenne warriors, led by figures including Crazy Horse and Gall, moved with a speed and coordination the Army hadn't planned for. Gall, a senior Hunkpapa war leader, had deeply personal reasons to fight with everything he had that day. Soldiers had killed members of his own family during the initial attack on the village's southern camps. Crazy Horse, already respected across the Lakota as a formidable war leader, led warriors in a sweeping flanking maneuver that cut off any route of retreat, driving Custer's men back onto a bare, exposed ridge above the river with nowhere left to go. Every soldier in Custer's immediate command died on that ridge. Custer was also among them. It remains one of the only times an indigenous force in North America completely destroyed a modern military unit in open battle. For the Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho, this wasn't remembered afterward as the opening move of a larger war. It was defense that succeeded. A day their families survived a planned attack because the warriors who fought did their job completely. Here's the contradiction that tends to surprise people most. The victory changed almost nothing about the eventual outcome of the conflict, and in some ways made things considerably worse. News of Custer's death reached the American public just as the country was celebrating its centennial that July, and newspapers turned his death into a story of national outrage and martyrdom. Congress used that anger within months to justify a sweeping act that formally seized the Black Hills outright without any compensation, tearing up the very 1868 treaty that had started this entire chain of events. The Army responded with a relentless winter campaign, hunting down the bands who had fought at Little Bighorn one at a time, cutting off their access to buffalo and supplies, until surrender became the only option for most. Sitting Bull and several hundred of his followers fled north across the border into Canada, where they lived in real hardship for 4 years, cut off from the buffalo herds that once sustained them. Crazy Horse held out longer, but surrendered in the spring of 1877 and was killed in custody just months later, under circumstances historians still debate to this day. The victory at Little Bighorn was real, and it was total, but it bought almost no time at all. So Sitting Bull's vision came true almost exactly as he described it, soldiers falling into the camp. But he never claimed the vision meant they would win the larger war, only that one day, and that's the part of this story that history tends to flatten. One afternoon of complete earned victory, sitting inside a much longer fight the Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho nations were already losing, and would keep losing ground in for years afterward. It's a fight their descendants are still living through today, on reservations across the northern plains, still negotiating over the Black Hills themselves, which the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in 1980 had been taken illegally, and which the Lakota Nation has refused to sell or accept payment for ever since, holding out for the return of the land itself.